live? My name is Paul Montagne, and today is the 29th day of September in 2019, and I assert my copyright to all the materials I'm going to use today. All right, now this is a class on discipleship. Discipleship is the focus of this class. However, our lessons in discipleship are going to be built out of two ingredients. And the one ingredient is spiritual discipline, or spiritual exercises. And the other ingredient will be a study of passages from the Sermon on the Mount. I need everyone to understand, this is a class. This is not an entertainment. You're going to have homework. You're going to be asked to do stuff between classes. It won't be as much as a college class, and you'll only be taking one class at a time. But there will be work to do, and some of it will be hard. None of it should take a great deal of time. I know that you all have your lives to take care of, but some of it will be hard. This will go on for as long as people are interested in working on it until we get to the end of the Sermon on the Mount. But if people stick around all the way till we get to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, it'll take about 3 years. It'll go on for the rest of this year for sure. I am your teacher here. Okay? I am your teacher. I am going to give assignments. I am going to expect you to carry them out. I am going to try to tell you some hard things. I am going to occasionally correct ideas we may have had from the past and tell us things to at least try out thinking. Even though a teacher shouldn't be trying to lock your mind in, so you have no choice, a teacher does sometimes require you to think this way as an exercise. And then you can review it and think back and decide if that's the way you really want to think. But first you have to actually try thinking and feeling the way that I'm going to try to teach you to think and feel and do about these things we're doing here. All you people out there on the internet, this is you too. This is not an entertainment. And if you wandered across this on YouTube hoping to be entertained by it, it's probably not going to be very entertaining. This is a class. If you don't do the exercises I give, you won't be punished. You won't get a lousy grade. You just won't learn what I'm teaching. And if you're not part of our community, if you're watching it independently out there, you need to find a small group that's going to look at this with you, that you can share with about this stuff, because small group sharing is a part of this class. So, discipleship. At the end of the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus instructs the apostles to go out and to make disciples of all nations. A disciple is not just a consumer. A disciple is not just someone who is entertained by worship at church. Not just someone who thinks Jesus is just all right. Is a nice guy. Is an incredible religious philosopher. A disciple is someone who tries to follow. I've got a children's message I used to do in which I led the children through playing Follow the Leader. Y'all know what Follow the Leader is? It's a game that y'all played growing up, not just an American game. And the point about Follow the Leader is you go where the leader goes and you do what the leader does. That's what discipleship is. We're going to try to learn to go where Jesus does and to do the things that Jesus does. We're not going to be just consumers of a religious product that the church is handing out. Discipleship consists of building patterns of behavior. That's the most important thing. There'll be some knowledge that goes along with it. But knowledge all by itself isn't discipleship. There are scholars throughout this country who teach at secular universities about Christianity, who have piles of knowledge about Christianity and Christian practices and about the scriptures and the gospels and what Jesus said and did. But they're just scholars. It's just knowledge to them. Some of them are Christians and also disciples, but many of them are just professors, merely learning the ideas and the words that we're teaching here is not discipleship. Those words are a means to an end. They are a tool to get us to the place where we are becoming different people, where we are learning skills of behavior and of relationship to one another and of wisdom in understanding what the world is, how the world works, and how we, as Christians, should be working in the world to make a difference to what it does. Discipleship is building patterns of behavior. They've understood this in the church for thousands of years. In the Middle Ages, they talked about it. They talked about it as building habits, habits of doing the right thing. And they talked about it because in the Middle Ages, they said, hey, you are like a horse or a dog, or at least your body is. It's an animal. It has instincts. It has things that it must do because it's built that way. It has patterns of behavior built into it that you can not control or that you can just barely control. And if you're going to become a spiritual person, if you're going to be more than just an animal, if you're going to be a person who is saved by Jesus Christ, a person who is one of God's children, then you're going to have to build patterns of action that are built on top of the nature of this flesh that we wear and the habits that are built into our nature as bodies. You're going to have to build spiritual habits. Well, building habits requires practice. It requires doing a thing over and over again until it becomes automatic, or at least partly automatic. Hopefully it becomes automatic in such a way that you can still manage it and do different things with it. All of you who've played sports know about this. You drill drills of simple skills, dribbling the basketball, swinging the bat, whatever you've got, and you build a set of skills. But then you have to put them together live in the middle of a game, responding to what actually happens. The skills you build up until they're almost automatic so that in the game you can think about the game. You can think about what the other players are doing. You can think about what's happening and what needs to happen. And we need to do that with our skills as Christians. We need to do that with our spiritual skills as followers and disciples of Jesus Christ. That's what this class is about. That's why sometimes I'm going to be a little pushy and a little hard to live with, maybe, about practicing the skills I give you and doing the exercises that I will be giving you. The reason that we need to do this is because the world needs us to be disciples of Jesus, not just believers in Him. The world is pretty screwed up, right? I don't have to give examples. All of us see examples in the news every day. The world is screwed up, and we are too. We are too. It's not an us and them. It's not they're screwed up and we're not. Only discipleship can address this problem. Only discipleship can help the world. Only discipleship makes us fellow servants with Jesus Christ who are able to help the work of changing the world. We're here to change the world. It might be the case, Scripture sometimes seems to say so, it might be the case that the world won't be completely changed and won't become all good until after it's all over, until the resurrection. But in the meantime, we're not just marking time. We're not just waiting to die and go to heaven. We should be working every week of our lives to make things better here and now. That's part of our job, that's part of our work. Not just making things better for us, by getting a good job and living in a nice place and raising our kids in good schools, but better for everyone, as best as we can. Even if the completion will not come until after we're all dead. From now until then, we still have work to do. And it's because we have work to do that I'm trying to give this class. In the old days, in the medieval church, it was thought, yes, human beings have special spiritual work to do, but they have to go to a convent or a monastery to do that. Because spiritual work consists of being in worship and prayer all day and removing yourself from ordinary life. We changed that in the Protestant Reformation. We said, no, ordinary life is where we do spiritual work. Ordinary life is where we celebrate and practice the presence of God and act like disciples of Jesus Christ. So if we're going to do this work, there are skills we're going to have to gain, there are things we're going to have to learn, and there are exercises we're going to have to practice. Now, one of the tools I said that we're going to use for becoming disciples is spiritual discipline. Spiritual discipline. So now we have to ask ourselves, well, what is spiritual discipline as opposed to any other kind of discipline? As opposed maybe to the kind of discipline when you practice for a sport, when the coach runs you through exercises. What's the difference between spiritual exercises and physical exercises? Or even spiritual exercises and math exercises? We'll have to think about that. So I want to give you a rule of thumb. That is a short rule, an incomplete rule, but a rule that will be good enough to cover 90% of what we have to deal with. Do you know what I mean by a rule of thumb? You don't have that saying, or do you have a saying like that in Taiwanese or Mandarin? Something like that? Mm-hmm. This is a rule that is somewhat simplified. It doesn't cover everything, but it covers enough to work with. It covers enough to get started and to make things happen. The rule of thumb has to do with distinguishing between spirit and nature. Nature is what things have to be. Nature is the laws of the universe that everything must follow. Nature is what has to do what it does, has to act the way it acts, has to be what it is. It means matter and energy and cells and plants and animals and DNA, however that works. Whatever patterns determine what a thing must be are its nature. Spirit, and this is the rule of thumb to keep track of what we mean by spirit. Spirit is choice. Spirit is decision. Spirit is action and thought and feeling and emotion. Spirit is what animates and gives reality to language and culture and human relationships. Human relationships. I know in families, there are relationships that are part of families that are nature, they're natural. You are the father of this child. You are the daughter of this mother. That's a natural relationship. It's built into the structure of things. It must be the way it is. But how you relate to your father, how your mother teaches you, how you fight or don't fight with your brothers and sisters, whether you treat your cousins as if they were as close to you as brothers and sisters. These are all spiritual matters because they arise from the choice you can make about how to do it. You have nature and spirit mixed together because we are mixed together. We are creatures with different things mixed together in us. We have a body. We have a nature. But we also have a soul and spirit. Spirit is whatever it is that makes the choices, that makes the decisions, that chooses the actions and executes them. Wherever there's a choice, there is spirit. Now, this is not going to be a class in philosophy. If I did philosophy, I could go way into the whole problem of spirit and matter. Western philosophy have done this. Eastern philosophy has done this. Taoism is really about the very mysterious reality of what the world really is and how nature and spirit interact. I'm not worried about that. A class in philosophy or deep theology might do something deeper or more mysterious or more wonderful than what I'm going to do here. All I need us to do here is to use this simplification in order to be able to do the work we're going to do. And the simplification is this, that nature is what has to be, and spirit is whatever gets to choose. Is whatever gets to choose and decide and do an action, and thus think and feel and relate to another. If you're interested in a little more than that, I did a sermon for Sky. It's on YouTube. It's called, Is There a You There? Because the presumption of all of this is that there is a you there. That each of you is someone who can make a choice, make something happen. The problem is that you have to decide that it's true. Because only you can be you. Only you can make your choices. Only you can do your actions. The you that does that, that's spirit. That's not just the flesh. So, spiritual exercises and spiritual discipline, and the ones we're going to practice and the ones that we're concerned about here, are about taking control of your life. Are about actually deciding what you're going to do and not being pushed around by everything that's around you, by everything that's built into you. We talk and we act as though we have only to make up our minds and do something and then it'll be done. Of course we'll do it. We make promises, we make choices, and we say, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do the other thing, I promise you I'll do this. And we frequently don't keep those promises. And we feel like, hey, circumstances conspired against us. It goes deeper than that. No matter what we tell ourselves about being spiritual beings, the truth is that our lives are only half under our control. They're only half under our control. What our parents taught us, what we learned at school, what we became because of the social pressures around us, what we've become because of the way we grew up and the way we did things, and the earlier choices we made. Sometimes previous choices that were free when we made them now bind us in the present so that we can't do differently, or at least not very easily. We need to know that it's a reality, that our lives are only half under our control. Half of everything we do, half of everything we think and feel is built into us by everything around us, is built into us by what we inherited in this flesh, is built into us by our parents and our schooling and our peers and the people we ran around with in high school and the people we ran around with when we graduated from college and before we got married. Half of who we are is partly controlled by who our spouse is. Some of who our spouse is makes us be the way we are. If we don't recognize this, if we don't understand this, if we don't admit that it's true, then we won't be able to take control of the other half. The half that we can control. The half that we can decide and choose and make happen. If we pretend to ourselves that it's all under our control and all we have to do is think of something and boom, we'll do it, we'll be kidding ourselves. We'll be kidding ourselves. And we won't be able to learn the lessons that are being taught here. The lessons that are going to be taught here will have to do with how to recognize when you have control and when you don't. And how to get control when you don't have it now. Sometimes getting control of a thing that you don't have control of now is really hard. Ask anyone in Alcoholics Anonymous. Ask anyone who's taken a college class that's so hard that they didn't think they could pass it. Ask anyone who's tried to learn a skill that doesn't come naturally. I doubt that many of us have the musical talent of a Mozart, and yet most of us learned some music along the way. And I'm sure you remember it didn't come easy at first. At first, we couldn't control what was happening. When we picked up the bow and the violin, the note was scratchy and out of tune and unpleasant. And it was that way for months and months. And our parents had to make us practice when we thought this is no good. But by practicing, piece by piece, bit by bit, even when we don't seem to have control, we can eventually gain control, gain skill, gain the ability to do something. That's what we're going to try to do with spiritual things here in this class. Now, this is the first time we've met. In future meetings, you will have done some homework, and we might sometimes start with a small group discussion. And this time, we don't have any work you've previously done for a small group discussion, but we're going to go to small groups now for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to come back at the end of the class, and I'm going to give you your assignment for the next 2 weeks before this class meets again. But for right now, I want you to gather in small groups. I want 3 groups. I want a Taiwanese speaking group here, I want a Mandarin speaking group there, and I want an English speaking group in the back. I want you to talk about whatever I'm going to give you to talk about in whatever language comes most naturally and easily to you. Okay? That's the whole purpose of this. And the question I have for you this time, to start with, is can you buy this? Do you understand what I've said about spirit and nature? Do you understand what I've said about spiritual exercises? Do you understand the meaning of being a disciple, not just a consumer? Share with one another. And if you find things that you don't understand, we'll take those as questions when we come back. But the first thing is to make sure you've heard what's been said and can repeat it to others or ask questions about it to others, or even someone can take this class and all the way through it think, Paul's full of nonsense. I don't believe any of this stuff he's teaching. You could take this class like that and believe that all the way through it and still gain what I have to teach here, because I'm teaching skills, not just knowledge. So for right now, 20 minutes to talk with one another about whether we can understand and work with this class this way. Can we make a commitment to a class that requires real learning and real work? Taiwanese speaking group over here, circle chairs if you have to. Mandarin speaking group over here, circle chairs if you have to. English speaking group in the back. Okay, we're resuming after small group. I will take 3 questions before I go on to the next part of the lesson. So, are there any questions that came up that you want to ask me now that you've had small group? And ask yourself, is my question one of the 3 most important questions to ask right now? So, are there questions?
Our group have 2 questions. The first question is, can you tell us the date of the sermon you referenced? Is there a you?
It's on YouTube. It's in the...
This year, last year?
It's this past year. And I'll look it up because I can find it. Who do I send it to so they can put out a message to everybody what the link is? Suling. I'll send you a link to that.
Second question was the big group discussion. We heard 2 opposite instruction papers. One is we follow everything you said and do it. The other voice is, oh, even we can disagree with you, so it's
That's because I want you to do both things. In order to learn, you start by letting the teacher tell you what to do. But you haven't learned what you're learning if that's where you stay. At some point, you have to also question what you've been made to do. Not before you do it, because then you'll never practice it, but after it. When you've begun to gain skill, now you say to yourself, is this the only way to think about this? Is this the way that I want to keep thinking about this? is this the right way to think and practice and understand this in order to go forward? Not until you do that have you done the spiritual part of the learning, which is to make your own choice about what you're going to do. But you have to start by doing what I tell you fairly strictly. You have to start like that in any class, of a language class, a math class. I mean, math classes, right? You start by doing what the teacher says no matter what, and the math is what it is, whether you like it or not. You start by following instruction, but you follow up once you've practiced by making your own decision. Any other questions? And I need to move on and talk about the Sermon on the Mount. We're not going to talk about the Sermon on the Mount very much this time. It's the first class. But I want to say a few things introductory. First of all, Jesus walked around preaching. He didn't have YouTube. They didn't even have television or radio. Everything you see Jesus say in the Gospels, he probably said at least a dozen times. And some of those things you see him saying, he probably said 100 times in different places at different times and mixed up different ways. What we find in Matthew as the Sermon on the Mount probably wasn't delivered as all one sermon, all at once, all in one place, in exactly this order from beginning to end. It was a bunch of bits and pieces of different things Jesus said at different times and in different places that the writer of the Gospel, that Matthew, put all together into this one sermon. And certainly there would have been sermons that were a lot like that, where Jesus would have sat down and for an hour said a bunch of things, one right after another. But they might not have been in the same order or exactly the same selection of pieces. And there's other things scattered all through the Gospels that might have been parts of other sermons. The Sermon on the Mount is a gathering of teachings that were part of sermons that Jesus preached over and over and over and over again. So I won't necessarily go through the Sermon on the Mount in order. I may juggle the order in order to bring forward the pieces that I need for the exercises that I'm going to be giving you. Also, one of the things about being disciples is the 12 disciples, those guys who followed Jesus around. Part of their job was to listen to Jesus so carefully that they could memorize the stuff he was teaching. So they would remember it and be able to teach it too once he was gone. That's part of why we have such a lot of faith in the Gospels, even though they weren't written down until maybe 20 or more years after Jesus was dead. Because the disciples had been practicing how to say the same things by listening to Jesus say them 100 times and by repeating them among themselves until they could say them too. Part of spiritual discipline, and one of the skills we're going to work on later in this class, is to be able to memorize some of these bits and pieces so that they are part of how we think, not just something we heard or know. So, that's general information about the Sermon on the Mount that's going to apply to everything I do in teaching from the Sermon on the Mount. But I do want to teach one thing from the Sermon on the Mount right here, right now, today, and those are the first words. Probably you've heard it something like this. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Right? You've heard that? Is that close enough to a translation that you've read? Is that close enough to the way it is in Taiwanese and Mandarin? Okay? Do you know what it means to be poor in spirit? Or is that just a mystery phrase to you? I don't see anyone jumping up and saying, yeah, I know exactly what that means. I'm going to change the words around now. And I'm going to tell you what I'm pretty sure that it means. So listen real carefully. Instead of using the word blessed, I'm going to use how lucky you are. Because in English, that makes sense. I don't know how it might be in Taiwanese or Mandarin, but in English, the meaning of blessed is so old-fashioned that we don't really understand it anymore. It means a lot like what we would say if we say, how lucky you are that you won the lottery. How lucky you are to have married such a wonderful woman. How lucky you are to have such good children. These things are all blessings that we know and recognize. So that's the phrase I'm going to use here. How lucky you are if you've lost your faith, or if you never had any faith to lose in the first place. How lucky you are if you don't know what life means and you don't think there's anything worth believing in. How lucky you are if you're not sure there's any meaning to life at all. How lucky you are because God Himself will give you something to believe in. That's how I would translate this first part of the Sermon on the Mount. This is what it means to be poor in spirit. It means to have lost our faith. It means to have lost our trust in God. It means to be poor in spiritual things, where spirit is choice, decision. It's God's choice of us. It's God's decision to have us as His people. And we're poor in spirit when we've lost that, when we don't have it anymore, when we've lost our trust in it. Even if it's still true of God that He still loves us, we don't believe it anymore. Or we believe it as a fact out there that preachers deliver from pulpits, but that doesn't really touch our hearts. And Jesus says this is a good thing. And the reason it's a good thing is that you can only trust God because of something that God does. You can't really trust God. You can't really have faith in God because of something that a preacher says, or a church teacher says, or something that someone tells you. Those things might be instruments. They might be instruments that God might use to speak to you. And we do believe that God does use those instruments over and over again all the time, especially the Word of Holy Scripture. But we can only trust God if God does something. And it's something that God does that gives us something to believe in. It's something that God does that gives us something to trust. And if God doesn't do it and doesn't do anything, then all our trust is in vain. Paul says something like that in one of his letters. He says, look, if the resurrection is just a myth, then all our religion is in vain. And of all people, we are most to be pitied. Jesus starts out by saying, look, the very people who you think weren't religious because they don't believe and can't believe and don't trust, those are the ones who are lucky because God Himself is going to give them something to believe in. They're not going to have to believe in the church. They're not going to have to believe in their politicians. They're not going to have to believe in their cultural leaders and their rock stars and their authors. They're going to get a chance to believe in God because God is going to do something. And that's why they're lucky if they don't have it now, if they don't have it without God. That kind of interpretation probably comes as a relative twist to most of us. And we're going to do that often here. We're going to twist things around to try to get to a place where we can see them fresh and new and understand what they're really saying to us. Because some of these words, especially in the Sermon on the Mount, we have heard so often, over and over again, especially from pulpits, that we think we already know what they mean. And because we think we already know what they mean, we're not listening to them anymore. And we no longer do know what they mean, because we're not seeing them as something that changes our lives and our hearts. Okay. I have 2 assignments. This class next meets again in 2 weeks on the 13th of October. These assignments are assigned to you to do between now and then. There's 2 of them, and here's the first one. Write about a time when you lost your faith or didn't have any yet. Write about a time when you lost your faith or didn't have any yet. Aim for about 600 words. Don't write any less than 300, no matter what. That's too little. You won't be really digging into your heart and your memory. Don't write more than 1,200. That's too much. You'll be wandering around and you won't be focusing. Focus. Write about a time when you lost your faith or didn't have any yet. Even those of us who grew up in the church have times when we lost our faith. All of us go through times in our lives when we've lost our faith. There was a time in my life when I didn't stop believing that Christianity was true, but what I believed was that God wasn't going to give me the woman that I thought I loved to be my wife. And I didn't trust God anymore to give me something good that I wanted. I had lost my faith. That is, I'd lost my trust in God. And it was so profound that I ran away from the church. And I stayed away from church for 2.5, 3 years. That is one of the things we mean by lost your faith. Even though I didn't intellectually cease to believe that it was true, emotionally, I'd lost my faith almost completely. I didn't trust God anymore. I know that every one of you, in one way or another, has had times in your life like these. Maybe it's hard to remember them. Maybe you don't want to remember them. Maybe they're far enough in the past that it's easy to forget. But I doubt it. We're all human. We're all human. Most of us lose our faith at least 2 or 3 times a year. Usually in smaller things, but sometimes in bigger ones. Write about a time when you lost your faith. Don't go forward to the place where God gave you something to believe in again. Don't go to there. We want to go there eventually, but if you jump ahead to there, you're not taking seriously what we want to focus on. Not until we really live in that place where we lost our faith will we really be able to see how God gave us something to believe in. So don't go there yet in this assignment. Write about 600 words, no less than 300 no matter what, no more than 1,200. If you got 1,200, you need to start carving it down. About a time when you lost your faith. You don't have to go read any other books. You don't have to go any footnotes. You don't have to go to the library and do research. All your research is going to be done in your own heart and in your own memory.
300 is type page, 1 page, 12 font.
Use word count. Students cheat with their fonts if you say 1 page or 2 page, okay?
12 font.
Your word processor has a word counter. Even if write in the language that you speak to yourself in your own mind and your own heart. Because I don't necessarily need to be able to read these. Does the word count I've given make sense in Chinese? Does it? It does? Okay. That's good. Write in the language that you speak in your own heart. That's the first assignment. That one must be done by the time you come back 2 weeks from now. Here's the second assignment. And I'd like you to try to have it done by the time you come back. But if not, it's an assignment that will continue and that you'll have to do eventually. And it's going to be one of the very hardest assignments you'll ever be given in this whole class. And I'm giving it right away at the beginning because I have to get you to break loose from the patterns that you've been living in all along. I want you to fast. I want you to fast from the time that you go to bed one night until the time you get up the day after, so that you fast 1 whole day from the night before until the morning after. That's going to be somewhere between 30 and 36 hours. I want you to fast. That means don't eat any food. Drink all the water you want. As a matter of fact, drink plenty of water. But fast. Eat no food. If there's medication you got to take it, even if the medication has a few calories in it. Not worried about that. If you're pregnant or nursing children, you shouldn't do this exercise at this time. This is not dangerous. Our ancestors fasted many times a year because they couldn't do it any other way. Food ran out before the winter was over. Your body is perfectly capable of fasting for one day without any harm whatsoever. Most of us carry enough extra. That's what this fat is. It's to feed us when we can't get food from the outside. Most of us carry enough extra that we could fast for 1 to 3 weeks without doing any damage to ourselves. One day is not going to damage you in the least. But I need you to do this because you are going to discover when you're fasting. Not at the beginning. With me, I don't usually eat in the morning anyway. By the way, in the last 2 weeks, I've done this twice. Just to make sure that I wasn't giving you a job I wasn't willing to do myself, okay? I usually get up in the morning and I don't want to eat anyway. You know? And in the afternoon, I'm busy. And you're busy at work. When it gets hard for me is, I come home from work. Now I'm sitting right in the middle of a house full of food. It's right there. And I don't have anything else to do to distract me. And I can't watch television to distract me because I usually eat when I'm watching television. This is going to be a big-time spiritual exercise because you will find, if you do it, that you will get to a place where for 2 or 3 or 4 hours you have to decide 20 times an hour that you're not going to eat. You will have to recognize a dozen times every hour how much your nature, your body, wants to take control of your behavior. And you're going to have to exert your will, your choice, your ability to manage your own behavior in the face of that, when it's so easy, because the food is right there. Our ancestors fasted because the food wasn't right there. But as a product of that, we have inherited a physical body that's capable of fasting. But for us, it's going to require decision and action and choice. Christine?
If you are taking medications where you do need to take food with your medication, check with your doctor before you do the fast. Just as a disclaimer for everyone on YouTube or live stream, things like that, check with your doctor first.
True enough. I said if you're taking medication, take it. Christine just pointed out if the medication you take requires to be taken with food, either don't do this now or don't do it until you've asked your doctor about it. I'll bet it will turn out that even in most of those cases, it will be possible to do a one-day fast as an exercise. Your doctor might just need to warn you about something. That's why I said that this exercise, I'd like you to try to do it before the next meeting, but you might not do it until sometime later in the course. You might have a medication issue, or some of the people who are watching this on streaming or will watch it on YouTube, I know are pregnant. I know are nursing babies. They'll do it later.
The other thing about fasting is that it frequently takes practice. So before I can do a whole day of fasting, I work my way up. I fast until noon, and then I eat. And then the next week, I fast until dinner time, and then I eat. And then maybe the third week, I can fast for a whole day, but I have to work my way up to it, and that's okay. Sometimes it takes practice.
So, we have to quit within 1 minute. I just want to emphasize, this is exactly the place where you're going to find that some of these spiritual exercises are going to be hard. This might be one of the very hardest. That's part of the teacher's strategy, to start you off on something hard, so that you discover that you can do something hard. You can do something hard. Because there's going to be other hard stuff to do that'll be easier physically, but harder mentally. God bless and keep us, and help us all these next 2 weeks. Amen.
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 Can I have 2 questions?
You can ask.